Citizen detectives, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. You guys know what time it is. It's time to talk about Yellowjackets. This week we are talking about Yellowjackets Season 3, Episode 7, titled Croak. This is going to be my spoiler review breakdown. So just, again, a heads up, a warning. This is going to have spoilers. If you haven't seen the episode, make sure you watch that before you watch this video. Otherwise, if you don't care about spoilers, feel free to continue on. Real quick, before we jump in, I just want to give a big shout out to all of you guys. Last week's episode was my most watched of the season, so thank you guys so much. That means the world to me. All the comments, the likes, everything that you guys have done is just, it blows my mind. I can't thank you guys enough for the support. If you guys are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it. That way you get notifications for all my new videos. And if you can, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this episode because we got a lot to discuss. So the episode opens up in the 90s timeline, and it says it is 3 days prior to the end of episode 6. And so we see a frog, it lets out a croak, hence the title of this episode, and then all of a sudden it screeches, and it sounds similar to what the Yellowjackets have been hearing in the past several episodes. And so after that, we end up seeing the scientists, they're recording the frogs, and then we see one of those is Joel McHale, which I know a lot of us have been wondering when he was going to be showing up, because he was announced earlier for casting, so we finally get to see him officially here, because I don't think you could really technically see him at the end of episode 6, was kind of in the shadows, but we finally see him here in the beginning of this episode. So then after that, we go to 2 days before the events of episode 6, and we get names for the couple here, where we find out they're husband and wife. We have Hannah and Edwin. Hannah ends up asking Edwin, where do you think our guide Kodi has gotten his scars? A little bit after that, we see Hannah, she's definitely checking out Kodi, and at that point Kodi says, the wilderness provides, talking about, pretty sure it's a rabbit that he has, which I thought was kind of interesting. There's definitely a lot of rabbit imagery throughout this series. And then I also thought it was kind of interesting too, just because that's similar to what Lottie and the Yellowjackets have said throughout the series as well. And then a little bit after that, we see them talking again, where we see Edwin, he ends up bringing up, he has like a snack, and he says that there was a team here previously that left behind some supplies, and so that's where those supplies that Coach Ben had found previously, that's where those came from. So we finally get the answer for that. Then we go to, it says 1 day before the events of episode 6. And we see Hannah, she's trying to learn more about Kodi, but he's really not giving her much information at this point. And as they're talking, then Kodi ends up telling them about the story about these group of frogs who are looking for a leader. So Zeus ends up giving them a heron because they wanted a leader who takes action. But what happened? The heron ended up eating them all. And so I think that's some interesting foreshadowing as far as what's going to maybe happen with Shauna in the lead here. But I definitely want to hear how you guys kind of interpreted that story. Do you guys maybe think they're pointing to someone else? That's kind of where I'm leaning, but definitely want to hear you guys' thoughts. And as they're talking about the frogs, they say how they had this big mating event every 7 years. They're Arctic Banshee frogs, I believe, is what they're called. I don't know anything about them prior to this episode, but they have this big event every 7 years, and how years ago people from the university came out to the same area. And so do you guys think that those people that came out from the university, are they the ones that maybe carved the symbol into the trees? Then as they're having this conversation about the frogs, they end up pulling out this phone, joking about how they're going to make a call, but it's really expensive to be calling out from where they are located. But as they go to do it, they accidentally end up breaking it. Now, do you guys think that someone in the Yellowjackets, maybe Misty or someone, or even maybe Van, if they come across this equipment, maybe that plays a part in how they're going to end up getting rescued? Maybe they're somehow able to fix the equipment? Curious what your guys' thoughts are on that. Then we go to the day of the events of episode 6, and we see Edwin and Hannah, they're hiking, and Edwin says, hey, we shouldn't trust this guy. And as they're walking, you see the symbol that the Yellowjackets have seen throughout the woods, so you know that they're getting close. Then as it gets later on in the evening, all of a sudden we see Edwin, he shows Hannah some of Kodi's clothes, but on the tag it says Eric, not Kodi. And so again, just bringing up that, hey, maybe we shouldn't trust this guy, we don't really know anything about him. And all of a sudden Edwin ends up smelling something, and so he thinks it's a fire, there's people there, maybe we should go see what's going on. As they're going, Kodi says, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea because we are way out and miles away from civilization. And so I think that kind of clears up the theory that I know some people were thinking that maybe the Yellowjackets were a lot closer to civilization than they realized. It seems like that's not the case if these guys know that they're miles away from anything. Then we get basically to the point where the end of the last episode ended off, where we see them approaching the camp. We see Hannah turns on her tapes as testing 1, 2, 3. And so just like we heard in the recording that we heard last episode, then we see Edwin. He says hello. The Yellowjackets, they just look absolutely shocked. We hear Van say we're going home, and then we get the intro of the episode. So definitely one of the longest sequences that we've got before we get to the intro, I think, throughout the whole series. And so right after the intro, we see the scientists. They realize, I think, that they've made a big mistake here, and so they're about to run away when Misty says, oh no, he died of natural causes, you know, trying to save the situation. And then all of a sudden, you just see Lottie comes up behind Edwin and puts an axe into the back of his head. And then Shauna, you see her, and she just starts laughing. I'm like, that is so fucked, Shauna. I mean, at this point, not really surprised, but holy shit. And then right after Lottie does that, sticks the axe and kills Edwin, she says, they don't belong here, it doesn't want them here. And so I think that just kind of further leads proof to the theory that I think that at least Lottie doesn't want to go back home. And I'm sure there's probably other people in the group too, maybe Shauna as well. So we're curious to see how that kind of plays out. And so after this, all chaos kind of breaks out at this point. We see Kodi and Hannah start running. The Yellowjackets start going after them. And all of a sudden, Kodi turns around and takes his bow and shoots it at Melissa. Now, do you guys think that she's going to die in this episode? Because I know a lot of people have been thinking that, you know, the adult version of her is going to be Hilary Swank, but I don't know, is she going to survive this shot with the arrow? And so then after that, we end up going into the present day timeline where we see Shauna, she's in the bathroom listening to the DAT tape again where she hears Edwin die. And then after that, we hear her listening to Hannah who says, I wanted you to be proud of me, not a mom with a teenage pregnancy. And so we find out that Hannah has a kid. And so is maybe that's the person that's coming after the Yellowjackets now? Then after that, we see Shauna. She ends up looking up Hannah plus KUH plus frogs, and she ends up finding her obituary. And at that point, Jeff, he ends up knocking on the bathroom and says, hey, are you going to be coming out of there anytime soon? Because I got to use the bathroom. So should I just go down to the lobby and use the one there? But Shauna says, no, you can't go down there to the lobby. We're hiding from a murderer. But then at that point, Shauna says, well, I got to go out and make some calls. And naturally, just like, wait a second, you can go out and do stuff, but we can't? That doesn't seem really fair, and I don't blame him at all. You can't have it both ways, Shauna. Then we see Jeff ask Shauna, are you finally going to let me help you? Shauna says, you got to keep an eye on Callie because she's a really smart kid and she's got a lot of questions. Now, do you guys think that all this secrecy that Shauna has going on, do you think that that's maybe going to be the thing that gets Jeff or Callie really in trouble and possibly killed? I'm really curious if you guys think that any one of them, if we're going to lose either one of them before the season ends. And right before we leave that situation, we see Callie in the other room. She ends up looking unsolved missing person cases in Canada in the 1990s. And so, yeah, she is pretty smart. From there, we end up going to Ty and Van, and all of a sudden Misty comes into the room. And as she comes in, she goes over to Ty and say, hey, why did you fail to mention that you actually met with Lottie on the day that she died? Which Van looks at this like, what the hell? Ty says it's none of their business, she didn't kill Lottie, but both Van and Misty are looking at her pretty suspicious, and I know a lot of us have been doing the same thing as well. But then Ty ends up saying it's obvious whoever ended up sending that tape is the one that killed Lottie, and you always kind of forget sometimes as a viewer that you don't realize that everyone knows this information. We obviously do, but Misty says, what tape? And so Misty's going to find out about the tape now. And after that, we go back to the 90s timeline where we see Hannah and Kodi. They're running when Hannah says, we should use the sat phone. But Cody's like, nope, we just got to keep going farther into the woods to get away from these people. As they're going, though, we see Hannah. She runs and she gets caught in some branches, which ends up ripping out some of her hair, which I know some of you guys, I've seen different theories that maybe that's how the one of the antler queens ends up getting the different pieces of hair on their clothing, which definitely can be the case, kind of matches up with that. And then she finally ends up finding a location where she can hide, and then she starts recording part of the tape that we had heard earlier, but this time we actually get a name, and it's Alex. So does that rule out the theory that Walter is their kid. I mean, it is possible maybe they could have a son as well, but we get Alex here, and so definitely want to hear you guys' thoughts on that. Then we go back into the modern day where we see Shauna. She's getting ready to leave, where Tai, Dan, and Misty, they catch her and say, hey, Shauna, what is going on at this point? And she tells them that there is more on that tape than just what Lottie did, and she tells them about how Hannah had recorded the message for her kid, in which that surprises all of them. They didn't know that that was on there. And so Shauna says she's going to take care of this situation, but the rest of the group is kind of skeptical just because of how the whole Adam situation turned out. She doesn't exactly have the best record when it comes to that. And she says, well, this lady tried to kill me with the brakes. And Misty looks at her and goes, oh, so now that wasn't me that did that to you, which is very fair. And then Van ends up saying, hey, we're going to join you. We're going to go to Richmond, Virginia. And so we get a Yellowjackets road trip, which I think is pretty awesome. And so as they're driving along, Misty, she gets a chance to listen to the tape, and she mentions how there was never any offspring mentioned in the obituary, but this was a teen pregnancy, and so the girl never had her mother's name. And then Tai ends up saying how both Jen and Melissa got close to Hannah, but then Van says that they're both dead. Now, do you guys believe that both of those characters get killed off, or could one of them be alive still? Because I definitely think it's a good possibility that Melissa is still alive, just because they have built her character up specifically so much in the season. I feel like it would kind of be anticlimactic for her to not be alive, just to kind of have all that build up earlier in the season. So definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts if you think that both of them or maybe one of them is alive in the present day timeline. And Misty ends up bringing a good point. She says, why would Hannah's daughter wait 25 years to get revenge on us? And so I'm curious, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Then they end up having to stop and get gas, and Tai is going to pay for it, but when she goes to use her card, it says that it's declined. Now she thinks it's because of the hotel charges, but do you guys think that it could be because of something else? Maybe something else bad Tai has been doing? Then Van ends up going over to Tai and says, why didn't you tell me about the whole Lottie situation? And Tai just responds saying, would you have wanted to hear that? You're getting better at this point. I know you don't believe it, but you're getting better. And Van, you can tell that she just doesn't really believe this. And she's like, I don't want to live this way. Even if this is real, I don't want to sacrifice other people basically for me to stay alive. And so Tai says, well, don't worry, you don't have to, because I'll be the one to live that way. I want to make sure that you get to live. And as the conversation's wrapping up, Van says, promise me that you didn't do it. And at that point, Misty ends up coming back and Tai doesn't have to answer, which I thought was kind of convenient, just the way that that whole happened, that she didn't have to say yes or no to that question. After that, then we jump back into the 90s timeline where we see Tai and Van. They end up finding the scientist camp, and they mention KUH, which is the same stuff that Ben had found, and so they do have this stuff. I wasn't sure, I couldn't remember that from earlier in the episodes of the season, but it sounds like they do have that stuff. And then we see Tai, she ends up, it looks like that she has a map, which is from the scientist, so will that help them with the location, like where they're at, maybe getting out as well? And then Van tries to use the phone, but it's broken, but she says, we don't really need any of this, we just need to find the people, so that way we can go home. Then from there, we end up going to Travis, Akilah, and Misty, and as they're walking along, Akilah says, well, Lottie must have had a good reason to do what she did, and it sucks, Akilah, she's really drinking the Lottie Kool-Aid at this point. And then they talk about how they need to kind of split up so that way they can cut off Kodi and trap him. When we go over to Hannah, we see her, she ends up hiding the tape, and then Shauna ends up finding her hair, and shortly afterwards ends up finding her. And now initially, Shauna wants to hurt her just because of what happened earlier, but Nat says, hey, everything's going to be okay, we're all going to find a way to get out of this. And then at that point, Hannah says, I know where we can get some medical supplies for your friend Melissa. And then from there, we jump back into the modern timeline where we see Misty. She ends up finding an Easy Pass ticket, I believe it is, and then gets a call from Walter, and Walter tells her that the DNA under Lottie's nails belongs to Shauna. And so at that point, she ends up sharing the news. She texts Van and Tai, tells Shauna was the one who killed Lottie, and so they're trying to figure out a way how to get the car to stop, but Shauna notices them all texting each other, and she says, hey, what the hell is going on? I'm not going to stop the car. But then at that point, all of a sudden, Van starts coughing, and she starts coughing up blood, and so they try to get her to the nearest hospital. We then go back to the 90s timeline where Kodi's running, turns around, shoots an arrow at Misty, knocks off her glasses, and then we see Travis and Akilah. They end up saving Kodi because he goes close to the edge, falls off, they end up picking him back up, but as they bring him back over the ledge, Travis ends up saying, hey, take us home with you. And so Yeah, I don't think that's going to go over too well with the rest of the group, Travis, especially if you're only trying to save you guys right there and not going back for the others. But I don't know, maybe he will try and go back, but I'm not leaning that way. I think that mainly he wants to get out of there. Then we go into the modern day timeline where we see they bring Van to the hospital, and as they're waiting to find out what's going on, Misty and Shauna, they're out in the waiting room, and Misty ends up saying, "Stop pretending like you care. You're the one who killed Lottie. There's DNA evidence for it." And Shauna, of course, denies this and says, "She was staying at my house. There's probably DNA evidence all over the place," which does kind of make sense. Then Misty also brings up the point that there's the easy, I think it's the Easy Pass ticket, and says, well, hey, what about this? This shows that you were in New York at that time as well, New York City. And so after they have that fight, Shauna, she ends up getting her in a car, goes to leave, and then we go back to Ty and Van in the back, and there's this guy making a lot of noise right next to him, and so Ty says, "I'm gonna kill that guy." Van hears that and says, "Don't do that," and Ty says, "Well, that's just an expression, but is it though, Ty? Is it?" Then as Van's sitting there, she hears Lottie say, "Take a breath now." Now, what do we hear? And so is she trying to get her to connect to it? Because she's kind of been denying it so far up to this point. And then we see young Van. She appears in the room. And she goes over to present-day Van and says, "We never cheated death. It was always an even trade." And then she goes and lights the bed on fire. And then after that, Van ends up looking over and sees Evil Tai and says, "Don't worry, I won't let them take your eyes." And Van responds by saying, "How long has it been you?" And Tai says, "Don't worry, this isn't the end of us," or something along those lines. From there, we jump back again into the 90s timeline where we go back and we see Lottie. It looks like she's eating Edwin because she's covered in blood. And then all of a sudden you see some of the other girls, they're helping get the arrow out of Melissa. So it looks like that she is going to make it in this situation. And then all of a sudden, as the rest of the group comes back with Hannah, we see Lottie stand up and she's just covered in blood. I thought that was a really chilling visual just to see that right there. Then we go into the modern timeline again where we see Callie and Jeff, they're talking, and Callie brings up the point that what if Mom is just a bad person, and then ask her dad if Shauna has ever mentioned any frog scientists, and Jeff kind of looks at her and, "Frog scientists?" And then Callie ends up saying that 2 scientists and a research guide ended up going missing less than 100 miles from the Yellowjackets crash site, and so she thinks that this tape was part of that research project and that Shauna, Ty, and Van, Misty, they know about this tape and know what's going on. But of course, Jeff doesn't want to believe that. And so the episode ends, we see Shauna, she pulls up to this woman's house, and she gets out her knife, and I'm pretty sure that's the same one that Melissa made her from back out in the wilderness, the holder part of it. And that's how the episode ends. So what do you guys think? Who do you guys think that this woman is? We're finally going to get, it looks like, an identification on this person next week. So can't wait to find that out. Definitely a lot to discuss here. If you guys are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it. That way you get notifications for all my new videos. Leave all your comments, thoughts, theories down below. You guys have been amazing so far up to this point. You guys have picked up on stuff that I've missed, which is always fun for me to go back and watch the episode and look at stuff that you guys point out to me. So I really appreciate that. And again, I can't thank you guys enough for all the support. The coverage of my Yellowjacket stuff this season, it's just been amazing. All the comments, the likes, the shares, everything. You guys are so freaking cool. And I'm working on it. I'm really hoping that I can get some more Yellowjackets interviews for you guys. So stay tuned for that. Fingers crossed that I can get a couple more for you guys. But yeah, that's the end of the episode. So can't wait to hear what your guys' thoughts are on this. And I will see you guys next week. Buzz, buzz.